Good morning, everyone. Well, at least from Australia, and welcome to this session on leading in a restorative school. I will introduce my guest shortly, Maurie Abraham, who's the principal at Hobsonville Point Secondary School. But first of all, I'd like to share my screen and do the proper introduction. So I'll just take us to the next one and start with an acknowledgement of country. And in Australia, of course, we never start a session like this without acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm working today. This is Gubbi Gubbi country and is unceded. And Maurie, I'd like to take the opportunity for you to introduce yourself and talk about where you are. You're based in Auckland and I'm based on the Sunshine Coast. So there we go.
Kia ora, Margaret. Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi kia koutou. Ko Maurie Abraham ahau, te tumuaki o te kura tuarua Onikiritia. Ngā mihi kia koutou no te rohe o te iwi o Kaurau Amaki, no reira tēnā koutou katoa. Yeah, I'm Maurie Abraham, the Foundation Principal of Hobsonville Point Secondary School, which is based in Auckland, and our school is built on the land that is the mana whenua of, is the tribe of Kaurau Amaki, who we have a really close relationship with. So greetings to you all.
Thank you, Maurie. And if I could just explain to everyone, when I was looking at the program for this wonderful conference aimed at educators who are keen to implement, it seemed to me that one of the things that could be missing is a discussion around what leadership looks like in a restorative school. So Maurie would be one of my go-to principals. He and I have a relationship that goes back quite some time now. And I'm going to invite him to tell some of his stories. But the first thing I want to do is move the slideshow along to show another version of the Johari window that we are most familiar with. And it places the leadership in a restorative school in that top right-hand quadrant. So I think Maurie is a walking, living example of authoritative leadership, and he has some very interesting things to say about the work he's done in two schools from New Zealand. One is a very small school in quite a disadvantaged area, and now he's working in a very large and kind of suburban, not really urban school in Auckland. So Maurie, can you start by telling us the story about how you changed your mind about discipline at a Portakey College?
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, love to. I was at a Portakey College for 20 years prior to coming here. In the first 10 years of that, I was one of its deputy principals, and I had responsibility for this thing called discipline. And I only had one understanding of behaviour management. That was, there's a list of rules. You do your best to support kids to comply with those rules. You do your best to support staff to monitor kids complying with those rules. And then you oversee what sort of punishments that would fall upon those kids when they break those rules. And so I did that for 10 years. And over those 10 years, 50 students a year were suspended from that school. So that's 500 kids, and the whole school roll was 500. And in any 1 year, up to 10 of those kids would be excluded from school, which over 10 years is 100 kids. And I didn't sort of realize it while I was in the soup that was happening. It was when I looked back on it that horrified me. But one of the things, the journey got kicked off because I was finding that every few months I had to find the next punitive thing to apply to kids, because we had these things called lunchtime detentions that kids got when they when they broke our long list of rules, and teachers weren't able to resolve the issues themselves, so they'd be put on a lunchtime detention, which I had to oversee. And after a while, I suddenly realised that kids were getting comfortable with that level of punishment and that it was having no impact on their behaviour. So I had to find the next punitive thing. So I introduced after-school detentions every Thursday, and that was pretty demanding on me and other staff and such like. And after a while, kids started getting comfortable with that as well. And then, in fact, some kids would be given one and not turn up to it. So, what do you do next? So what did I do next? I found the next most punitive thing I could legally do, which was run Saturday detentions. And so I applied those, and kids got comfortable with those. And then what did I do if they didn't turn up to those Saturday detentions? And just as importantly, what did I do when kids loved turning up to school on Saturday morning and getting some of their work done? But I'd run out of room to go with the punitive approach. And that coincided with the time in which I became principal. And I had that position for the next 10 years. And overnight, when I was appointed, I simply said, I am not going to stand down or suspend any students. Now, I didn't know what else to do other than what we'd already done. But just by simply saying that, I suppose putting words to a vision, just by simply saying it, it changed a few things. And for the first 2 years, I think we suspended 5 or 6 kids a year, which is a great drop from the 50 or so. But I still had nothing really other than just trying harder and harder and harder to win these kids and their families around. And that's when myself and my DP went to a restorative practice 3-day training that Marg Thorsborn was delivering. And our Ministry of Education realised that this was a good thing for schools to get involved in, and they funded us to go. And I just loved it because I saw a formalised structure, a really rigorous structure that captured my view of the world and what we should be doing. And then the real value of it was that just as we were about to leave to go on the 3-hour drive home, my DP got a phone call to say that our netball girls A team had been caught drinking alcohol in their changing rooms after a tournament that they had been in another city. And so under the old way of thinking, that would be, well, we'll better suspend these kids and put them through the punishment cycle and see where we go from there. But we had the luxury of that 3-hour drive home and the luxury of just having 3 days of looking at restorative practice. So we processed that and talked about what we might do to immediately apply those principles when we got back. And so we did that. We made a few mistakes, but I'll never forget the power of that meeting of the 11 girls with their parents, with their coach, with the local Netball Association chairwoman, the police youth aid officer, their form teachers in school, and we just explored what had gone wrong and asked the girls to talk about what had gone wrong and how they felt about it and what they wanted to do about it, and lots of tears. And it was so powerful that at that point I was convinced that this was the way to go.
Thanks, Maurie. That's a really fascinating story, and I always love it when people who do the training have something to go back to and get their sleeves rolled up with straight away to make it happen. Because you can go to the training and then think, oh well, I'll just wait, and then it might be a week, it might be 10 days or 2 weeks, and then all of that fresh stuff in your head is kind of lost to the ether. So I remember you talking about then having to dismantle your punitive kind of systems in the school. Can you talk a little bit about how the kids coped with that and how did staff cope with that?
Yeah, so I started making quite a few mistakes, I suppose. This was now near the end of the school year, and I had a staff meeting and tried to share what I knew about restorative practice and what my DP and I had just experienced, and said to them, so next year we're going to stop the punitive approach. We're not going to be standing down or suspending any kids. We're not going to be having these lunchtime detentions, and we're going to follow some practices built around restorative practice. Now, a number of my staff, they went away on the summer holidays and thought, oh, Maurie will get over that over the summer and we'll get back to normal when we get back, so there's nothing to worry about. But a small handful, I don't think, slept very well that summer holidays because they relied on the punitive approach. It was the only tool that they had ever experienced, and they relied on it for control in their own classrooms. And so they worried quite a bit. And, I did my best with my DP to prepare. This is what we do in these situations, and this is how you do a bit of restorative practice stuff. We concentrated on this thing we called the mini chat that we'd got from Marg, because we felt that's what the teachers would really need the most. And away we went. And sort of got it wrong, really. I had a mutiny on my hand a couple of 3 months later with some staff coming to see me to say, this isn't working. I mini chat with kids and they still do the wrong thing. And I realized that people were believing that the restorative process and the mini chat in itself was the consequence for bad behavior. And I started to think they're not understanding that it's a part in the process that leads to something that might be a consequence. So I formed a group which included some of the strongest naysayers, I suppose, and some of the other key people. So I'm looking at this document around, that was my sense of urgency. I didn't want to go back to the other ways. I had a bit of a mutiny going on, so I built this coalition, I suppose, of people. And we sat down and we thought, and I said, the bottom line is we're not going back to what we did before. We're going to be driven by these restorative practices. What do you think's wrong with it? Where would be the best things to support and such like? And, some really good stuff come out of that. And we developed some really neat processes from those meetings, such as, for example, we got staff to list their favourite misbehaviours and the ones that they experienced the most. And we got them into groups and said, right, so if we were following a restorative approach, what would be the steps that we could get to, that you could follow? And we actually ended up creating a manual, a guidebook of if someone uses bad language in your class, or if someone is continually late to class, here are some processes you can follow that were restorative. And, that was pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And I'd say quite quickly, we built 80% of the staff's confidence around that, and never won the whole staff in the time I was there. There was one or two people who were always a bit of a struggle, but we stuck to our guns. And whenever a staff member in that group would come to me and say, I want this to happen, I would say, well, that's not going to happen. If you want the behavior to change, then you need to be buying into what we're doing.
Yeah. So it's a really strong view amongst the people who are experienced more in schools now, that it's really about changing the adult behaviour first. Yeah. Before we can even bother, with kids. And the other important thing about this too is an understanding that one single restorative process might not be enough, to rewire a kid's brain. And people are often surprised when I say in training that the restorative process, that evolved from our ancient, Indigenous practices, was never designed around preventing reoffending. It was always around repairing the harm that had been done. And if reoffending falls away, then we're very lucky. But one of the things I like best about what you talked about here with your guiding coalition, Maurie, it wasn't just a team of you and your DP, but it was engaging with the people who had to actually do the work on a daily basis. So I love the idea of their favourite misdemeanours because they are so consistent across countries. I can tell you it is no different in New Zealand than it is in Australia. So I want to move on to the next slide, because I know you have something very important to say about this. Whoops, too far. And just to explain it to folk if they haven't seen it in the book that we wrote around implementing restorative stuff, it's all very well to have the paperwork and the policies and so on created in a school, but how you make that happen, it's not so much the what, although the what's very important, but how you make it happen is another matter. And in this diagram, right bang smack in the middle of everything is the vision and values. And what John Cotter, who developed the previous model that we saw on the slide, has always said about why change efforts fail is that one of the reasons is that the vision and values are under-communicated to the power of 10. So I know, Maurie, that this is something that you're very keen on, and I want to just move on to the slide that looks at identity and beliefs, which is below the green line here, and get you to talk about how you work that in your school.
Yeah, that previous slide is just crucial. The vision and your values, they've got to be more than what's just written down. They have to be present, and if they don't match your practice, you've got two choices. One is change your vision and your values so they match your practice, or change your practice so they match your vision and your values. So at quite a simple level, when I look at a lot of schools' vision statements, they'll use the word, we want to be an inclusive school. Now, as soon as you suspend and expel kids, well, then you've failed in your vision, because you haven't been inclusive, you're being exclusive. As soon as you say that you want to promote diversity, or promote achievement in your diverse community, lots of schools say that. As soon as you stream kids, you're not allowing for diversity, you're actually promoting inequity. As soon as you have crazy rules around uniform and jewelry that go against diverse cultures, then you're not actually carrying out that vision. So, those are quite simple examples of practice matching vision. But by the time I'd been through that journey that I just described at Aportiki, and to go back to it briefly, just to acknowledge that the kids understood it much more quickly than the adults. And in fact, a common line from a kid when they were referred to you because they were in trouble would be, but we never even had a mini chat, or I haven't had my restorative. How come I'm here? That they understood the process and they wanted to be part of it. But by the time I'd left there, my whole thinking about relationship-based behaviour management had really created a transformation in my thinking about teaching and learning. I went on a journey that was looking at relationship-based behaviour management, and it became a journey to relationship-based curriculum and pedagogy. Just thinking, back at that school, because we became restorative and dealing with behaviour management, achievement just started going through the roof. And all the external audits on our school performance was around about the atmosphere of mutual respect and students being heard and students being treated well were coming through. And so I could see that link, that if we concentrated on respect and repairing harm to relationships, achievement and engagement were really climbing. And so even at that school, then we started to think, well, what can we do to make relationships the center of our teaching and learning? And we did lots of really cool things like, changing the school day from 5 one-hour periods, as most schools have in New Zealand, to 300-minute periods. So you had longer periods of time so that teachers and students could develop relationships with each other. There were less transitions during the day to where things can go wrong. And we also created these small group learning advisories where every teacher had 15 kids of mixed ages, and they had them for 2 100-minute blocks a week, which is a big chunk of time. And so they had to work with them on supporting them to cope with school, to set their academic goals, to grow the right dispositions that they needed to be successful at school. So that changed my approach to teaching and learning. And it was that experience that I reckon won me the job of being the foundation principal of a brand new school. And so by the time I got there, I was able to enunciate a real clear vision around relationships and well-being being at the centre of everything that the school was about. Not only just about managing behaviour and managing relationships, but what teaching and learning also looked like.
Yeah. So that's a real privilege, to be able to start the way you want to, keep going, and to finish, of course. And something, it just reminds me of something else in that section under the green line is about the relationships and connections. So I think what I've heard you say here is, Maurie, that you've restructured the school to intensify the nature of relationships between kids, but also between kids and teachers. So can you talk a little bit about your recruitment these days now, because you have a very special culture at that school, which is deeply relational. And so if I wanted to come work at your school, what would you be asking me during my interviews?
Cool. Yeah, I'd be exploring, even before you got to the interview, what your mindset was, like what sort of mindset you had. And the main focus area would be on your ability to maintain strong, positive relationships. And that's with colleagues, with parents, and particularly with students. And so in the even written application form, we'd be asking you to talk about how you maintain strong, positive relationships with those groups, and to be quite specific and give us examples of what you do. We'd ask the referees to comment on that, talk about what evidence have you got of this person having strong, positive, productive relationships with all of the people involved in education. And at the interview time, a question that I would always ask that was really important to me was to ask them to describe how they manage conflict and disagreement, and to talk us through how they manage that. And I'd say to them, I don't care whether you were successful in managing that conflict, but tell me about what you did and what you learned from that. So we're really, really quite specific about those things, because you could be the best physics teacher in the country, but if you can't maintain positive relationships with colleagues and with kids and with parents, you're no use to me, because we actually believe that relationships are at the core of effective teaching and learning.
And there's masses of research and data around about relational pedagogy these days. That points us all to the fact that we've got to get out of that top left-hand quadrant, and into the relational quadrant. So if I take one step further to talk about what's under the line again, and again, you had the advantage of starting a school the way you wanted it to be, but there would have been more than just a restorative initiatives in the time that you've been at Hobsonville. So how do you manage the communication, particularly with staff, about what you are asking of them to do and how it's going?
Yeah, so every second Tuesday I have a session with the whole staff. We call our staff morning meetings kitchen table. So we gather around the kitchen table and we're checking on each other before we kick off for the day. But I have every second one. It's called Tuesdays with Maurie, which is a cool book and a really neat film you should check out. It's about an old man giving a younger guy some advice, and it really fits really well with me.
Now that you're the old guy, you mean?
Yeah, now that I'm the old guy and I'm supposed to be wise. So on those sessions, I've got half an hour, is that I always start with our school vision, which is to establish an inclusive, engaging learning environment, which empowers learners to contribute confidently and responsibly in a changing world. So it's just a list of words, but it describes the young person we want. We want people who are empowered to learn for the rest of their life, and they want to make the world better. So I always start with that, and then whatever it is that I want to be talking about, I point to that particular part of the vision, and to keep it alive. We've fleshed that out into a series of principles and values as well, which I'll often refer to. But next week I'm talking with staff about self-regulation, how we can promote more self-regulation opportunities for our young people, especially in a bit of a COVID sort of influenced time. And so I'll be looking at our vision, the empowered learners part. What makes an empowered learner? Well, if they're self-regulated and independent learner, they're going to be much more empowered. So, I'm always bringing that to life. And often in schools, you've got to address issues around relationship harm and behaviour. And so we always start with that vision and then talk about how evidence and research, as you've just said, Mark, shows that the power of the relationships is the most important thing. So we'll come down to that. And then we'll say, so when we're thinking as a school, how are we going to respond to people leaving the grounds or social media use or whatever the particular discipline issue is, we go back to dealing with it in a way that keeps the relationships strong, that we don't damage relationships. We've just gone from some of our kids wearing uniform to total mufti this year, and a lot of people were freaking out about what a dress code would look like. So, we went right back to, we want strong, positive relationships with kids. So that's, let's ask them what they think is going to be a good dress code. So, we're continually doing that all the time. And I'd, say about the vision. So just as important as the vision are the values that a school claims that it professes, because so if you claim to value diversity, like I said, but you have practices that suppress diversity, well then you've got to change that value, or you've got to change your practice. But we put our values, which are innovation, inquiry, collaboration, connectedness, and excellence. We put them in the center of everything we do. So when we're doing project learning, our kids are assessed against those values. How collaborative were they? How connected were they? How strong was the inquiry? How innovative were they? And we've always used that as our tool for assessment. And that's got to such a point that now we're looking at developing a graduate profile. So every kid leaves our school, not just with their academic record, but a graduate profile, because we want them to be able to contribute confidently and responsibly in a changing world. So they need more than academic excellence, they need this sense of values. So we're developing a whole graduate profile now about how innovative am I? How collaborative am I? How connected am I? How strong is my inquiry? And what level of excellence do I show in my activities? So again, it's our values. So they're coming right to the fore. Because when you think about that word values, it actually means anything that's under that label is the most valuable thing your school has got. But most schools, and I've been in these schools myself, I've led these schools, is you have these values and you park them. Another great example of those values is that you go to most schools' prize givings and you've got your student body there and they're looking up onto the stage and the kid goes across and gets top in English and everyone applauds. Someone goes across and gets top in math. And, those hundreds of kids sitting there, almost every one of them knows what the school values. That school values coming first in an academic subject. Yeah. And almost every one of those kids know that no matter how hard they work, they'll never get that prize.
Yes.
So right from the beginning, we thought, what should our prize giving about? Oh, I know, it should be about the things we find most valuable. Oh, those are our values. So our kids get prizes for these things that we have just sitting below our values, called Hobsonville habits. They're our dispositions of being resilient, adventurous, curious, and creative. So kids go and get a prize for being the most resilient, the most curious, the most creative. And then our top level prize are about the things we value the most. So who's been the strongest in inquiry? Who's been the strongest in collaboration? Who's been the strongest in connectedness and compassion? And every kid who's sitting in that prize giving can look at those and say, I could be the most compassionate kid in the school. I could be the most curious kid in the school. And so it just kept, I suppose I've described that to capture how schools have to take things like their values and show their kids and their community that those are the things we value.
Yeah. I just so love the inclusive nature of that you don't get the gong because you're the brightest kid in the school, when in fact, you know, in other ways you might be needing to develop a whole pile of other strengths. So that's terrific. And Maurie, just before we kind of finish this, because your school now, how long have you been at Hobsonville now?
We've been open 8 years.
Yeah, so you're well into the sustainability part of, you know, Cotter's 8 steps. And I'd just like to make the comment that every year schools have to start almost all over again because you have new staff, new parents, new students. Some schools have terrific staff turnover, you know, for all sorts of reasons. But I understand that this year you had quite a few new staff, and I'd like you to share the story about how you, you know, immersed them in what it was to be a staff member at Hobsonville Point Secondary School. It's a great story.
Yeah, it is a great story, and you know, it's a story that could quite possibly not have happened, because, you know, we've always had new staff induction on one day where we meet new staff and just overpower them with the crazy way that we run our school, and then the following day we've always had a whole staff teacher only day. This is before kids start, and sort of do the same sort of stuff again and do a little bit of getting to know each other. And we were sort of sitting back last year thinking, oh, you know, shall we roll out the same old thing? And one of my DPs said, hey, look, we've got 14 new or returning from leave staff, and we need to do things really differently. And we say relationships, or in New Zealand we call that whanaungatanga, the sense of family, is really important. We need to really model that. And I start off thinking, but I got to get this across, and I got to get this across. And but we talked it around, and we decided we'd do a 2-day stay overnight at a local marae, which is a Maurie gathering place. And that would concentrate on whanaungatanga, on being a family. And so we did that. We were welcomed on. We were divided up into teams, and every team had to cook the meals and clean up for their colleagues. We all stood in the wharenui, and we spent close to an hour and a half with everybody. There's 80 of us standing and doing their personal greeting to everybody about where they're from and who they were. And then every activity over the 2 days would start with a connection, a familyness type activity. We might be talking about learning design, but we'd do this sort of group activity first that connected us together. And we will do that now forever and a day because it was so powerful. And what it meant was that we really understood what school had to look like for our kids. So, you know, in the following week is our first week at school. And in most schools, kids arrive on that first day, you say hello to them, and you chuck them into their timetable and away they go. But these are kids who, you know, 150 kids have never been to our school before. And other kids have been away on holiday. So we spent the whole of the first week with, you only came in and met with your learning coach. That's sort of like your form teacher, with your parents. And you met them, you got to know each other, you had a half-hour meeting. And so in week one, that's all it was one-on-one meetings between the kids and their families and their learning coach who was going to look after them for the year. On the second week, everyone comes to school, and we spent 3 days getting to know each other, building relationships, getting to know the school. Nothing like assessments, no tests, nothing like that at all sorts of neat activities with your little hub, your little family at school, and then your wider learning community. And then they spent the 3rd day doing activities all around our community. It was just really cool. So we didn't start our timetable classes till the Thursday. So, you know, there's a good week and a half went by where we concentrated on building relationships. Now, we'd always done it like that, but it gave it more strength and weight and acceptance from people, because we just experienced it ourselves as a staff for a couple of days.
That's an extraordinary gift, and you know, the investment of that time of the connecting before content stuff really will play out in terms of how settled kids are and how ready they are for learning. So Maurie, I just want to move on to the last slide here, which is really how people can contact either of us when this is complete and I've uploaded the video. The slideshow will also be available for people. But I just want to just stop sharing the screen again and say how very much I have, you know, enjoyed our time together over the years. But it's really about hearing the stories about how you've turned something around and also how you've created something, and in some ways doing what you did at a Portuguese but in a different school, and that is you continue to build the plane while it's flying. So you know, if the school leadership doesn't practice innovation, how on earth can you expect it from the kids? So thank you so much. I've loved our second go at this. The first one, folks, I blew because my sound wasn't working. So we had a little panic there. But thank you, Maurie, and what a pleasure to speak with you again.
Yeah, and can I just say, Mark, you know, I'm the principal who I am now because of that restorative practice journey. There's no doubt about that. I mean, that sort of stuff always existed within me, but being able to have some processes and such like to follow. And what I would say to anybody who's, and this is about leadership, is that you've really got to believe this stuff. You've really got to believe that relationships are at the core. You've really got to believe that you can be successful with every kid. You've really got to believe that you can manage all of the conflict between adults. And you've got to model that every single day about how you deal with those issues that emerge. Because being a restorative school is not about having a series of processes that are built on restorative practice principles. It's actually living it and breathing it and walking the talk all day. And it's a lot easier than it sounds, and it's certainly much more rewarding than the other way of doing things.
Yeah, look, it just feels better, doesn't it? It's better for your blood pressure. It's better for your well-being. So thanks again. These have been really important messages. So,
Cool.
Okay, I'll stop recording now. Bye, Maurie.
Cool.